ever noticed AI that works great in English, but not so much in the other languages? If you have felt that gap, you're not alone. And today we're diving into why multilingual AI still has a long way to go. Welcome to the Women in AI Research podcast, the show about remarkable contributions of female researchers around the globe. I'm your host, Jekaterina. Yeah. Also, speaking about that, you mentioned previously, and you also have findings that go back to this aspect in multiple studies. And I'm speaking now about machine translation to or from English.
Yeah.
When we speak about non-English languages, what is what's your take on this? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this approach of translating everything from English to non-English language, or using English as a
pivot, the anchor.
As a pivot? Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So English is predominant. It is definitely the most strong, the highest resource, the language that we use, even in publishing research works. Um,
Mhm.
it sometimes it acts as a barrier of like who is included and who is not included in research communities or in the research. So yes, so English is a pivot language. So you translate from your language. So there is works, there's papers that talk about that language models reason in English because it has seen all the data in English, and it does not reason in other languages because it hasn't seen it. And so what you're doing is when you're translating everything into English, you're changing it into like an English context. And then when you're translating it out, a lot of times you lose the meaning. So I was just talking to an ethics professor in who teaches in Mandarin Chinese, and she said that they would translate it from Chinese to English back to Chinese in their I guess in their learning system, and the translations are very strange. And so we come to the problem. So I'm walking you through the process, but the soundbite, the key point is multi LMs and reasons in English, so it doesn't contain the other cultures and languages and ways of thinking and the ways of speaking. So you can imagine that when you translate from when you translate from your language to English, and then you feed it into a language model, like a foundational language model that everybody is feeding their thoughts and their work and their their I guess like their business APIs into. This model only predominantly thinks in the English language and in the westernized context. So it doesn't encapsulate the cultural nuances, and it doesn't capture the values and the ethics of your language and your culture. So if you think about it, right, like maybe in like certain cultures, they value, harmony and group dynamics, and sort of like the better. So in Asian cultures, there's this idea of like, preserving, doing what's good for everyone, versus like maybe in the Western context, you really want to sell yourself and promote yourself. But when you feed it into the language model, it generates things is now not capturing your context as well. Same thing with language, right? Like it could be a very straight dictionary translation. So, something that is translated as to walk might be translated to something that's like, to walk the land, or to walk the land by the rivers. Now, that doesn't like all that nuance, cultural nuances, the beauty of the language, the underlying meanings, that's all lost. And so it's similar like when you're translating, it depends on what you translate to. Like, when you in Cantonese culture and in definitely like the Hokkien Taiwanese culture, when you say, have you eaten? So a common greeting, you don't say hello, how are you, or like how was your day, or how are things going, or like more informally, what's up. But the formal greeting when you talk to someone, when you call someone, is have you eaten? And from someone from the outside, it's like, have you eaten? Like, yes, I had breakfast like 5 minutes ago, and this is what I ate. But in these cultures is an act of care, and and so when you call someone, it's like, have you eaten? Or like, any time of the day, the formal greeting is have you eaten? And that's sort of like conveying like a sense of care, and like the care of their well-being. So yes, so this is a very non-technical answer to a very technical question, right? You're asking me, should everything be translated to English? And the technical answer is yes. We have papers on that. In fact, we just resubmitted something. The journal process is very, very long. So we just resubmitted something that translated everything from that language, like Sinhala and Tamil, to English and back, and then only translated between Sinhala and Tamil, and sort of cutting out the English middle. So yes, we do have technical results on that. But on the other hand, there's also now that with the cultural work and LLMs, there is a lot of meaning that is lost. That cultural meaning that is lost when you are translating everything into a dominant, just English, just just westernized dominant context, and you're sort of losing all the individual richness from every single language and every single culture when you're just doing it, feeding it through there.
Yeah, that's the awesome summary, I would say, of what we were speaking about in the previous episode with Barrett Schwartz. I will link it to this
Oh
video as
yes,
well.
ferret.
But what I specifically like about what you said is that it almost sounds to me like if you just care about the numbers in the benchmarks and
Yes,
you want to achieve a higher score in the standard benchmark, then translate to English and back and have English as a pivot language. That's what technically makes it better. But if you care about
the
the
meaning.
actual meaning of what the model is doing, the actual cultural background knowledge and the meaning of that model is going to understand, then it's probably not the best way to move
But
forward.
but I think the other problem is this information is not encoded digitally anywhere, right?
And then we are back to data, right?
So we're back to the issue, right? So we're back to the problem of like what is really the interaction between, and a senior, like a grandparent and a child, and that information being transmitted through of the culture, the traditions, your celebrations, that is missing when that child is only interacting with a language model. So, you know, I also worry about our education system, right? Like our students only writing their things with the help of a language model versus like maybe going out and actually talking to a human or to somebody who has that traditional knowledge.
Uh, do I get it correctly that you're worrying that that type of knowledge, cultural
Hmm.
knowledge, it's not possible to even
Capture.
capture that via language alone?
Yes. Oh, yes, for sure.
Okay.
So the things that you experience in your culture, the way of making a certain dish, the way of celebrating a certain festival, the way you talk about why a spiritual ritual, like why it's important to your family. That's very specific to your family and very specific to your culture. And even like, like I said, like some of the cultures are very like regional specific too. Like that is not, I don't think that is fully captured by a language model that's just generically scraping things from the internet. And then, having like the dominant, like, most of the internet is English, right? Like, how is it going to capture? And even if some historian or anthropologist go and curate that material, it's still like a small amount of material. So right now, no. How are we going to do it? I don't know. Ethically, should we do it? Lots of interesting research questions. It'll make a
Interesting.
really great thesis thesis topic.
Yes. For someone who is open to that, I would definitely recommend to consider that topic. It's really interesting whether
It's
and
intriguing.
to what extent
Hmm.
we can learn culture from language only. We
Right.
can to some
Well,
extent for sure because
capture.
English English only language models show that
Hmm.
we can capture that to some extent, but
Hmm.
what is that extent
Yeah.
is another question.
Mm.
Okay, interesting. So let's shift to another slightly different but very relevant topic, which is
Great.
cross-lingual
Yes.
transfer, not
Yes.
just uh, English only, but cross-lingual transfer.
Hmm.
And the cross-lingual transfer has been a central promise of multilingual NLP,
Mm.
right? I would probably call that, maybe not everyone.
Hmm.
Uh, Based on your research,
Hmm.
how well you think that aspect of cross-lingual transfer has been fulfilled by now in
Uh,
NLP?
I don't think it's fulfilled at all. There's this idea of like the curse of multilingual linguality. I think there's this idea that do we want to represent? Do we just want one model or one for whatever and one model that does everything, right? The one general model that does everything. It does all the languages. It does all the tasks. It does all the reasoning. Like a one central model that does it all. Or there's the debate whether we want regional models, right? Like one model for Africa, one model for Indic languages, one model for European. So there's Eurobird that came out. There's do we want one model for every region? Or do we want to go even more fine grained? Do we want a Hokkien model versus a African, like maybe like a Aramaic model versus, like a very specific language models. Um, you know, and there's also the mathematical idea is how much, because there's the idea that, embeddings from the model, they contain some sort of meaning, like some sort of semantic meaning, which is like some sort of ideas that these mathematical vectors capture. And then there's thoughts, so there's papers that says every language sort of encapsulate the physical world similarly. So the vectors should be similar, even though the words are different. Like a dog is a dog, right? But I just said like walking in one language might mean very different in a different language. So we want to talk, yeah. So we also want to think about um yeah so there's these thoughts that the models um can be captured for different languages because we think about the physical world similarly, but then there's also these ideas that maybe the models eventually become saturated and then you cannot add more languages into that model, or it cannot, or this model only thinks in English and it doesn't appropriately capture the nuances of other languages. Yeah, so some very, very interesting things. Yeah, so for sure we're still falling short. As I mentioned in SIP 200, we talk about um in SIP 200 we definitely talk about regional languages from Africa, South America are definitely falling short compared to, the dominant English and European languages.
Right. I also like that idea that you have mentioned that uh, the idea of having the embedding as a representation of
The
some
physical world.
specific
Yeah.
aspects of physical
Yeah.
world, yes.
Mhm.
And I think it's not, it relates, it is relevant to some extent to your aligned fees research,
Mhm.
which is not about embeddings, but about the layers and freezing and
Yes, yes.
unfreezing
Yeah.
different layers
Mhm.
uh, to make the cross-lingual transfer possible. Can you speak a little bit about that and how you came up with this idea in the first place?
Okay. Yeah, so in terms of the cross-lingual transfer, this is so we collaborate with Felix Gashi from France. His PhD topic was on alignment, right? Aligning the model and how that could perform better for smaller models. So we stuck
Mhm.
to these smaller, XNLI and BERT models. Yeah. And so the along the lines, I think I've I think for a long time I always had this idea that different layers. So I did publish a paper in 2018. It was only on archive, but we look at the idea that different layers of the neurons might focus on different tasks. So there's yeah. So I think Bertology also finds this in that maybe the lower layer neurons attribute to the semantics, and then the higher layer neurons might attribute to like maybe more of the task. So we only fine tune the higher the ultimate layer with the the last with the second last layer, ultimate and penultimate. So so that idea was revisited here where we try to freeze different layers of the neuron. The lead author, Steve Backles, is now doing his master's on reinforcement learning, and now has is starting his PhD on that. So the idea is that we want to take a look at different layers and freezing them differently and see if a particular one could be more efficient or could have some language knowledge in it. Because I guess in 2018 we only studied like tasks and different semantic like different units, but now we're looking at languages, and maybe we can also look at culture as well. But the idea is that so then we started freezing different layers because we have limited compute and we can be freezing individual neurons. We didn't get as far on the LR front either because of computational limitations. But from studying freezing different layers, we did find that the lower layers did work better for tasks, and especially for tasks like part of speech tagging, which is more like lower level, very much like a linguistic task. It worked really well. We had to work a lot harder to get inference, which is a higher level um, problem, like reasoning, inference, natural language understanding. We did have to work harder on that, and so we have a new AACL paper coming up where we mixed the languages, and it performs quite well for natural language inference as well as post tagging. In the original align freeze, it did not really work as well for inference, but now with adding more data based on language similarity, that actually does make a difference. And
Right.
then we are actually looking at future work where we might look at like multilingual neurons, and also looking at looking at different ways of mixing the data, the different languages in the input data.
Hmm. Interesting. So, if to speak about layers,
Hmm.
uh, can you see any differences between multilingual and monolingual LLMs in terms of what do layers represent?
Oh,
Or is it quite different, or is it maybe even model?
huh. That is very interesting research. That's a very interesting question. We have not actually explored monolingual, um, monolingual models. Mostly we focus on smaller multilingual models, encoder-decoder
Mm,
models. But we have been running experiments for larger decoder-only models that are based on the English, like they're mostly trained on English language. And there's some preliminary results are interesting, but we haven't done like the linguistics analysis for that yet. So
mhm.
I think that could be something that is an interesting line of inquiry.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing some of your results in the future
Next year.
if you decide to go.
Next year.
Yeah, next year for sure. Um, uh, your experiments with the aligned trees
Hmm.
also revealed that languages that are using non-latent script
Mm,
are susceptible to some catastrophic forgetting during realignment.
hmm.
Uh, Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Why non-latent scripts are that vulnerable in your opinion? And maybe you do some additional work on that as well.
So this is not only true from a line freeze. I think we can bring it back to Iroko Bench. We can bring it back to all the languages. When you move away from the dominant script, when you move away from the dominant language, the performance definitely degrades. And part of the reason could be because the neural architectures, right? Like there is tons of NLP tools and pre-processing that is very tailored to English and Latin scripts. Usually, when I tell people about low resource language, I start off with a definition of what is considered low resources, low resource data, but also and compute, but also low resource in terms of the available tools. So having your parsers, dependency parsers, having your taggers, or some of these languages don't even have appropriate linguistics experts to formally define it and formalize it. So, for sure, for different languages and different scripts that starts to deviate away from English, there's it's less able to be captured because it's not cleaned properly, it's not parsed properly, and there's all these issues related to it. We are currently working on some architectures to help include more languages and to help alleviate that. For African languages, we always come back to Aramaic because it is the single non-Latin script. Um, but we also, yeah, so I think what is fascinating here is that we did, use different strategies taking from different models from the embedding inputs. And we Frankenstein together a bunch of different architectures to try and make it more robust to natural language inference and to work well for Aramaic, which is a different script. Yeah, so we are actively studying that. The work is ongoing. Hopefully, we'll have a paper out, and so that I can talk more about it in the future.
Okay, so it's time now to slowly wrap up our conversation, and I just wanted to ask you as one of the last questions. Um, Throughout your work, you have worked a lot on the diversity of multiple different languages and the cultures as well, and this whole work definitely contributes to linguistic and cultural inclusion
Mm,
in the community.
mm.
Um, what would you what advice would you give to other researchers that want to work on underrepresented languages? Uh, what would you like to for them to have in mind, like on top of their
So
head?
yeah, so I think in the current landscape, there's not a lot of industry money to be made on not work on working in non-English languages or non-dominant languages. So as you go down, there's less industry. As you go down into the rare languages, there is um, less industry interests or funding for like anything that's extremely low and extremely niched. So there's definitely some balance in that. I think one thing you also want to be delicate about, especially for me, I work collaboratively with a lot of interdisciplinaries, is that everyone is passionate about their language, and so there's different poles from different languages and different issues in different language communities. So you just want to be respectful and honoring and being inclusive and acceptable of their perspective. And I think as I mentioned in the past, it's always the best to start with your own language because you have that personal connection, you have that lived experience, is authentically, who you are. Um, so when I work on a particular language with students, I always encourage them to start with their own language. Even with myself, um, I have quite a few projects on Taiwanese Hokkien, which is my mother tongue language. And so then based on that learning and experience, I'm hoping to take what I learned and hope to in, you know, um train students to work on their own language as well. So yeah, so I think it's it's a very rewarding topic to work on. um, for me personally very fulfilling, and it really just is doing something that's beneficial that's going to impact many people in the world. So that is what is exciting for me. And I've sort of listed some of the more soft skills, things that you need to watch out for. In terms of technicality, based on your background, somebody who is from social sciences can focus on something that's more, data collection, benchmarking, or applications. And then if someone who is more mathematical or more technical and deep learning, then they can focus on a lot of the architecturing and creating new models, small models. So there's definitely work to be done all through the broad spectrum of disciplines.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that advice. And also thank you for actually working on this topic, even though it's maybe not necessarily that topic that's going to get the most of the hype in the nearest future. But I think it's one of those topics that is extremely important. And it's great to hear your approach on like inviting interdisciplinary research into the topic as well. It's not just for computer scientists. It's not just for social scientists. It's the area where everyone can
A
bring some
difference.
value, yeah, and make some difference. So, as we close, what do you hope people take away from this conversation? And also, is there anything that you wanted to talk about, but I did not ask you?
Yes. Yeah, so this is, as I mentioned, multilinguality and multicultural multilingualism in the technology. It's very, very exciting. To me, is trying to bring everybody to the table. I think when we're using these technologies is very neat, is very cool and exciting. But just think about, the millions of people who don't have access to this because they don't speak English, and also the small perturbations of harms or the being left out, um, because of the outputs of these models too, right? Like they're input wise, they are unable to access the technology, but output wise, some of these models might be outputting, small incorrections that, you know, even though it's small, but there is billions of people in the world using the models, it adds up to a lot, right? Maybe, imagine like you're from a certain culture and maybe the model always outputs, this culture, there's always something that's a little bit negative, and in a different culture is always something a little bit positive. Little things add up to a lot. I guess these are things that people call like systemic, right? Systemic biases. When your foundational model is built in, all these systemic things gets built up. Yeah, so I think is very exciting. Language models is changing the world because everyone's using it. But let's think about, how it's affecting people who are marginalized in the fringes. So I'm even thinking like recently we've been talking about like the elderly, as well as, immigrant elderlies who are definitely have less access to public services or who are less able to access government information. So yeah, so if there's one, yeah, so going forward, there's lots of exciting things. And I hope that others are also excited to join in solving this big problem.
Amazing. And this has been such a thought-provoking conversation about the critical importance of multilinguality in AI systems and the cultural inclusion in the AI systems. Thank you so much for sharing your research and insights with us today.
Thank you so
Uh,
much for inviting me.
and thanks to our listeners as well for tuning into Women in AI Research. You can find more information about Anna's research and publications in the episode description. So check that out. And we'll see you in 3 weeks with another deep dive with the women researcher pushing the boundaries of AI.